Why does a full-bird U.S. Air Force colonel fly in the back seat of an F-15E Strike Eagle over hostile Iranian airspace? The official story tells you he hiked 5 miles with a broken leg while fighting off the extreme elements and enemy forces. What they aren't telling you is the highly classified intelligence he was carrying securely inside his heavily guarded mind. We need to understand why the Pentagon authorized the destruction of 2 massive C-130S and an armada of very deadly drones. They did all of this to make sure he didn't fall into the heavily armed hands of the notoriously brutal Iranian security forces. On Friday, the 3rd of April at roughly 7 in the morning local time, his jet was completely obliterated by an enemy missile. In the chaotic seconds that followed this massive explosion, everything he had been trained for became his only vital lifeline. Both the primary pilot and the weapons systems officer ejected successfully right after the combat aircraft took a critical hit. The pilot and the WSO drifted apart rapidly after ejecting as their parachutes carried them away to totally different locations. That rapid separation when the high-altitude wind takes 2 large parachutes in different directions turned into a true nightmare. One man comes down in an accessible location where the fast-moving U.S. rescue forces actually managed to find him within a few hours. The other officer comes down much further into the rugged terrain, plunging deep into the freezing mountains and the terrifying dark. The biggest anomaly in this entire official narrative is the surprisingly high rank of the man sitting in the vulnerable back seat. A full colonel operating as a WSO during a kinetic strike strongly suggests a highly specialized and very non-standard secret mission. You do not put a high-ranking commander in that specific operational combat seat unless he brings an absolutely critical tactical skill. Many astute defense analysts strongly suggest this specific colonel was actually a high-tier electronic warfare expert of some rare kind. He possessed extremely critical OPSEC knowledge regarding the overarching combat mission that simply could not be compromised in any way. The geopolitical reality indicates this extraction operation was potentially involving deeply hidden and heavily fortified uranium facilities. This classified rescue was never truly about saving just one man from the brutal environment of the extremely hostile mountain terrain. It was purely about protecting America and its most sensitive operational secrets from ever falling into the wrong global military hands. The entire might of the local Iranian forces was slowly closing in on him with a massive $60,000 bounty placed on his head. He was bleeding from the ejection sequence because the rapid spine compression and severe limb impacts will practically always slow you down. The official narrative wildly expects you to believe he walked off these catastrophic physical traumas like a fictional movie action hero. We are actively stripping away the fabricated fairy tales to clearly show you the brutal truth of this incredibly chaotic military operation. A United States Air Force commander sat alone on a freezing ridge with nothing but a standard combat pistol and a small survival radio beacon. He moved through the darkness anyway, despite being seriously wounded in the extremely hostile mountain environment of this southwestern area. The first thing your survival training tells you after a violent ejection is that you must absolutely never stay at the burning crash site. The burning wreckage acts as a massive, glowing target that marks exactly where you came from for the advancing enemy ground troops. The mainstream media wildly claims this severely injured officer miraculously hiked 5 tough miles while dragging a totally broken leg. Climbing 7,000 feet of hostile rock with catastrophic physical trauma is an absolutely absurd Hollywood fantasy for the masses. We must critically examine the massive 400-kilometer geolocation gap between the initial crash site and the final rally point. A badly wounded man cannot possibly walk that massive distance across the harsh Iranian wilderness in a mere 36-hour time frame. This glaring logistical impossibility brings us directly to the highly classified concept of tactical evasion plans of action in combat. He was almost certainly moved by deeply embedded local assets or heavily armed secondary extraction elements working strictly off-grid. When the Strike Eagle crew violently ejected over the Iranian territory, they did not just go completely silent and vanish into thin air. They immediately switched to a heavily encrypted device called the Combat Survivor Evader Locator, which is built securely by the Boeing. Attached firmly to the pilot's survival vest, this device easily survives the brutal ejection sequence and immediately starts working hard. It strictly does not transmit any vocal audio because standard voice communication can be easily intercepted and quickly triangulated. Instead, it rapidly sends short, encrypted bursts of crucial location data and simple coded messages regarding nearby enemy troop movements. These frequency-hopping signals cleverly look like random background noise to the highly advanced Iranian electronic warfare grid systems. There is absolutely no voice, audio, and no easy radio signal to track, making any hostile triangulation attempt practically impossible. It establishes a secure link to military satellites and continuously feeds real-time operational data to elite rescue teams on the ground. The exact position of the targeted commander was being fed directly to Central Command and every element of the massive rescue package. He bravely restricted the use of his personal beacon because he deeply knew the enemy forces could eventually detect its constant signal. He wisely used it only in very short bursts when the severe risk of detection was noticeably lower than the cost of remaining hidden. Every single second the beacon transmits is another dangerous moment. The hostile electronic warfare network has to locate the target. While the officer desperately lay hidden in his rocky crevice, something else was happening entirely in the dark realm of intelligence. The CIA launched a massive deception campaign, spreading false rumors that U.S. forces had already successfully recovered the combatant. Operatives told the enemy network through secret back channels that the primary target was currently moving in a heavily armed convoy. The hostile search teams rapidly redirected their main combat units toward the expected tactical routes a fleeing convoy would likely take. Local militant informants aggressively started looking for vehicular movement that simply did not exist anywhere in the targeted province. The entire Iranian search apparatus blindly swung in the wrong direction, buying the stranded man the precious hours he desperately needed. This highly sophisticated deception operation completely gave the extraction package a perfect tactical window to close in on his location. Advanced drone cameras overhead were closely watching the rugged terrain, while human intelligence networks constantly fed false data. At some precise moment in the dark night, the real location finally locked in, and the aggressive military rescue mission officially began. We are closely examining a deeply covert operation that flawlessly utilized advanced psychology and electronic manipulation to save a life. Conducting a highly complex rescue deep inside the heavily fortified Iranian A2AD umbrella is an incredibly dangerous mission. This anti-access area denial environment means every second on the hostile ground drastically increases the risk of total failure. You do not just send a lone medical chopper when dealing with a high-value asset stranded inside a heavily defended military zone. The U.S. Air Force aggressively spins up a massive CSAR package complete with armored A-10 Warthogs providing close air support. A hasty tactical task force was immediately created, combining the highly elite Army Aviation Regiment and Navy DevGru operatives. The incredibly massive aerial fleet included heavily modified HH-60W Jolly Green helicopters and heavily armed fighter jet escorts. Hundreds of elite special operations personnel willingly flew directly into the dark combat zone to extract one single stranded man. Lethal MQ-9 Reaper drones methodically established a heavily armed close protection perimeter directly around the target location. These heavily armed drones were silently engaging hostile ground targets moving within roughly 3 kilometers of his exact spot. Individual hostile troop movements were systematically identified by thermal imaging cameras and ruthlessly cleared from the area. That brutal reality means the advanced stealth drones were actively killing Iranian soldiers who blindly got too close in the night. The stranded officer quietly lay in his rocky crevice, listening to the terrifying sounds of violent airstrikes in the valley below. Heavily armed Iranian military convoys aggressively attempting to reach the extraction zone were violently struck by Allied bombers. Special Operations Forces successfully established a heavily fortified temporary staging base deeply inside the hostile foreign soil. This temporary tactical base was established shockingly within close striking reach of highly critical Iranian nuclear infrastructure. Fast-moving fighter jets aggressively orbited overhead continuously, providing necessary combat air cover for the vulnerable ground team. The military threw unimaginable firepower into a massively dangerous combat zone, all just to protect the highly classified knowledge. One nimble MH-6 Little Bird helicopter bravely flew directly to that freezing mountain ridge and successfully rescued the target. The extremely skilled aviation crew quickly brought the injured operative safely back to the temporary dirt landing strip in the valley. This massive operation was definitely not a clean surgical extraction because it rapidly escalated into a brutally violent ground battle. The local enemy forces lost a significant amount of armed personnel actively trying to reach the highly valuable American military asset. Heavily armed American special forces aggressively killed numerous advancing local soldiers, specifically to keep them completely away. Brave elite operators willingly engaged in a massive, chaotic firefight at the dark extraction site to secure the heavily guarded secrets. They violently fought with absolutely everything they had in their tactical arsenal, just so that one strategic asset could finally live. We must immediately shift our critical attention to the truly catastrophic hardware cost of this massive military rescue operation. The highly sanitized official report conveniently glosses over the devastating casualties and the staggering loss of costly gear. However, astute defense analysts are currently tracking up to 9 confirmed hull losses from this single frantic combat extraction. A tactical hull loss in the military aviation world specifically means an expensive aircraft that will never come back home again. Losing nearly 10 airframes in a rapid 48-hour window makes this easily the most expensive combat extraction in decades. Independent tactical experts strongly state that the real number of dead and severely injured operatives is being heavily censored. The devastating final casualty tally paints a terrifying picture of a rapidly escalating conflict deep behind enemy combat lines. An armored A-10 Warthog providing critical overhead close air support was reportedly shot down during a vicious enemy engagement. The incredibly brave pilot of that heavily armored aircraft was completely lost while actively defending the extraction perimeter. 2 heavily armed tactical drone units, including an MQ-9 Reaper, were violently destroyed by the advanced Iranian missile systems. A highly maneuverable MH-6 Little Bird assault helicopter was completely scuttled after suffering critical mechanical combat damage. Furthermore, 2 massive medical transport Blackhawks limped away from the intense firefight with extremely heavy structural damage. This absolutely staggering scale of aerial devastation proves beyond doubt that the target possessed highly sensitive intelligence. The powerful U.S. military simply does not sacrifice nearly $500 million in elite aviation equipment for a standard pilot. This massive expenditure of highly advanced hardware clearly demonstrates the strategic desperation surrounding this vital extraction. Protecting the highly sensitive operational secrets clearly outweighed the terrifyingly high cost of losing so many expensive aircraft. The global media desperately wants you to focus exclusively on the heroic survival tale of one man walking across a freezing mountain. They actively use these emotionally manipulative narratives to distract the public from the grim reality of a devastating tactical loss. Losing that many elite specialized airframes in a single night is practically unprecedented in the modern history of global warfare. A deeply complex combat search and rescue operation of this immense magnitude requires authorization from the highest levels of power. The top commanders in Washington were fully willing to sacrifice multiple, expensive combat squadrons to secure this specific individual. This undeniable tactical reality completely shatters the carefully manufactured Hollywood illusion of a flawless military rescue mission. The enemy undeniably inflicted massive structural damage upon the elite American aerial armada before the chaotic mission finally ended. We are looking at a brutally violent confrontation that cost the national defense budget hundreds of millions in a very short time span. Every destroyed airframe perfectly highlights the extreme lengths the government will go to in order to protect its dark global secrets. The incredible nightmare truly began when the 2 massive C-130 transport aircraft landed on the soft Iranian dirt strip. Their heavy nose gears immediately sank deep into the treacherous, muddy terrain, trapping over 100 elite operators. The stranded extraction force was suddenly facing a terrifyingly catastrophic scenario, with the morning daylight fast approaching. After several tense hours of frantic recovery attempts, they desperately had to bring in 3 additional assault planes. These heavily armed secondary aircraft were completely necessary to fly out the rescued officer and the trapped ground troops. Leaving those highly advanced giant transport machines completely intact behind enemy lines was absolutely not a viable option. The highly trained Delta and Ranger elements deliberately initiated a heavily practiced protocol to sanitize the airframes. When those giant aircraft got stuck in the thick mud, the elite American ground forces simply did not just casually walk away. They methodically sanitized the advanced avionics and quickly scuttled the expensive machines using powerful explosive charges. This extremely drastic tactical measure was strictly required to aggressively prevent any reverse engineering by the hostile forces. You absolutely cannot allow heavily sanctioned foreign enemies to closely examine state-of-the-art military aviation technology. With bright daylight rapidly exposing their vulnerable position, the U.S. Air Force unleashed multiple precision-guided bombs. This brutally final aerial bombardment totally obliterated the two abandoned aircraft into an unrecognizable pile of burning metal. Somewhere in the remote, jagged mountains of southwestern Iran, two violently burning wrecks permanently mark the terrifying battle. The mainstream media continuously celebrates this extremely bloody, chaotic extraction as a perfectly executed, miraculous victory. We have systematically looked at the massive logistical footprint and the highly unacknowledged advanced combat hardware losses. The Pentagon publicizing all the fake heroic aspects of this brutal rescue operation is a heavily calculated political distraction. The carefully crafted propaganda completely ignores the hundreds of millions of dollars totally lost in the unforgiving foreign dirt. Exposing over 100 highly trained Tier 1 operators to an incredibly dangerous enemy network carries an unbelievably high risk. A deeply strategic combat search and rescue mission of this immense magnitude demands total absolute secrecy from the high command. The incredibly fast deployment of such massive combat firepower specifically highlights the devastatingly high stakes of the conflict. We must continually question the deeply flawed official narratives constantly fed to the unsuspecting public by the Defense Department. This chaotic mission clearly demonstrates how modern warfare heavily relies on incredibly fast tactical adaptation under extreme pressure. The terrifying loss of multiple elite combat airframes severely degrades the overall readiness of the forward-deployed aviation squadrons. Enemy intelligence networks will aggressively study this massive military engagement to cleverly exploit any revealed tactical weaknesses. The complete destruction of the extraction helicopters perfectly illustrates the incredibly chaotic unpredictability of actual ground combat. I really want to hear from the experienced military veterans and the highly knowledgeable geopolitical tacticians down in the comments section. Was violently trading nearly $500 million in advanced aircraft truly worth extracting one single deeply compromised intelligence officer? Could this catastrophic hardware loss actually be a massive tactical blunder, cleverly disguised as a brilliant public relations victory? Let me securely know your most detailed geopolitical breakdown directly below in the comments, and I will proudly pin the absolute best analysis. The real truth behind this extremely controversial and heavily censored military operation remains buried deep within classified government vaults. We will relentlessly continue to expose these dangerous fabricated myths to ensure the incredibly brave fallen operatives are properly respected